Back in on a Friday morning, GameDaySportsRadio.com. Boji Wood along with Mike Bernard. Mike, how are you doing this early morning on a Friday?
I'm doing well. How about yourself, Coach?
Oh, I couldn't be doing much better. Finally got these college football quarterfinals in the books, and I think the interesting thing, it went down to the final four, but the interesting thing for me is that none of the top four are in the final four. Oregon, Georgia, Boise State, Arizona State. All the folks that got buys lost. I don't think that's going to be a high on the list of anyone next year.
Well, yeah, and it's not, there's nothing wrong with getting the bye, but again, all four better seeds lost, but there was not one single upset. Texas was favored by 2 touchdowns. Ohio State was favored by 2.5. Notre Dame closed 1 or 1.5 over Georgia. Penn State was minus 12 over Boise. So even Coach Kirby Smart, he says, hey, he was asked about it, and he didn't give any excuses at all. But he said, "Hey, I tend to look at what Vegas says."
Yeah. And hey, did you think that just a few years ago you would ever hear a college football coach say that?
No, no, no. I mean, but now that it's sports betting is legal in 33 to 35 states, and it's regulated. And again, I've always said, if you want to know, don't look at the rankings. Look at the point spread, because money is going to tell you, odds makers, handicappers, we're going to have a better indication. We're not 100%, of course, no one is, but we're certainly better than. You can't have Boise State as the 3 seed.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, it's not about knocking the Mountain West or the old Pac-12. You can't have them. I mean, Penn State, that was the only game we lost, actually, was I took Boise in the quarterfinals, and even that game was close, but Penn State was favored by 12 on the road.
Yeah. It's and I've preached this from the very beginning. If you want to have a true playoff, you know, either go to 16 teams or back down to 8 where no one gets a bye. And it just like the NCAA basketball tournament, every once in a while you see that 16 seed knock off a 1 or a 15 knock off a 2, and you'll have that. But at least everyone's playing, and you're not giving someone a free week based upon, oh, well, they won their conference, or this is the best seating that we can give them without putting another SEC or another Big Ten school with a bye. It is what it is, but and hopefully they'll keep working and get the flaws worked out. But if not, I'll be quite frank with you. I like this system a lot better than what we've had in the past. And taking a look at the games this past week, Texas 39, Arizona State 31. That game went to double overtime, and my hat's off to this Arizona State team. And also Kenny Dillingham, 34 years old, wise beyond his years in the way that he handles his team, and they gave Texas every bit that the Longhorns could stand.
They did, and Texas looked bigger, stronger, and faster from the start. And we had Arizona State, and look, it did not look good at halftime. And but in the second half, Arizona State, they held Texas to only 7 points in the third and fourth quarter, which was a great accomplishment. And Longhorns win in double overtime, but Arizona State gets the cover. And that's a game you get, like you said, you got to give Arizona State, those kids and that coaching staff, some credit, because a lot of times that turns into a rout, and they hung in there.
They did. And again, I have issues with the way that targeting's enforced anyway. It's but like a lot of penalties, pass interference, offensive holding, what have you, it's subjective to whoever is looking at it. I,
How
from
is that not targeting? I'm glad the game was not decided on that play. I understand, but by the rule. That's the thing. It's like the referee needs to come out there and say, hey, due to we don't want this game to be decided on a call, we're not going to call it targeting this time.
Yeah.
But by definition of the rule, it was targeting.
By definition of the rule. But look at the defensive player. If you go back and you look at that, Taft has his head up. He does not lower his head.
He didn't launch.
He
Sorry.
did.
He didn't
Yeah,
launch.
no, he did not launch. He ran through the ball carrier, or in this case, the receiver. And that has been textbook tackling since the dawn of time. Is you see what you hit, and he did not specifically go for the kid's head. But let me, if I'm 6 foot and you're 6 foot and I run straight into you, guess what? Our heads are going to hit, And so to me, as an old defensive guy, I would have hated for that to have been called targeting in that given moment. But at the same time, if you go back and regardless of whether I agree with it or not, the definition of the rule, that should have been called targeting.
Right. But again, glad it wasn't.
Yeah.
Because you don't want the game to be decided on a play like that. And because it was a good football play, but we see that get called targeting, I would say 70% of the time.
I've seen a lot less get called targeting than that particular play. And again, as you pointed out, had they make that call, that's going to push Arizona State down, even though their special teams game was iffy at best. But it would push them down well inside field goal range to try game-winning kick. So, double overtime. That was a great game. But now I'll tell you something that wasn't a great game. Unless you're an Ohio State fan.
Or unless you bet them.
That's right. The Buckeyes 41-21 over the Ducks. And let me tell you, that was the biggest blowout forget Notre Dame, Indiana. The Buckeyes, they owned the Ducks from the start. 41-21 doesn't do it justice because I frankly believe at 34-0, had Ryan Day wanted it to be, it could have been 68-0.
Yeah, that was a good result for us. We had Ohio State and the over. And, the Ducks were competitive in the second half. They outscored Ohio State 13-6 in the second half, but still lost by 20. Look, I couldn't help. We've been doing Inside the Numbers since 2015, so almost 10 years. And I remember from those Oregon teams from 2010 to 2015, they would snowball teams. You would see the game was like a one-score game. The next thing you know, the Ducks win by 35. Well, that's what Ohio State did to them. And in fact, they did it to them in this game. And they also did it to them in the championship game back in 2014.
Yeah, and this again, they avenged the loss back in Eugene, back in I think that was in September, and Dan Lanning, his little stunt that he pulled by putting 12 players on the field late in that game. Listen, that has been a slow burn in Ryan Day and that Ohio State team since that game, and they were going back in. And the Buckeyes left, no doubt, who the better team was on that day in the Rose Bowl. Moving on to Penn State and Boise State, 31-14. To me, this game was Boise State, a couple of plays go their way, and this score doesn't happen. This is a very close game, maybe even a game that Boise comes back and wins. They get a touchdown call back because of a hands to the face penalty that was rightfully called, but they get that touchdown. And all of a sudden we're looking at a one-score game, and you and I both know in a one-score game, anything can happen at any time.
Sure. We took Boise in that game. Once it got to 12, we bet them. Penn State covered the 12. That was our only loss in the quarterfinal games, thankfully. Penn State was up 10 with 4 minutes and change, and I'm watching it. And I'm like, okay, let's just get a couple of first downs and take a knee because James Franklin's a bully. He likes to run up the score. But in this setting, he's not going to run up the score. He's going to take a knee. But of course, Singleton just ran right up the middle, 58 yards. And
Mhm.
then even Boise had a chance to backdoor it, but could not get it in the end zone. And now we have Penn State and Notre Dame matched up in the semis.
And of course, the Sugar Bowl postponed today by the horrific events down in New Orleans. But Notre Dame, they came in and I think for the first time in a very long time nationwide, people are beginning to respect this Notre Dame program. A lot of times when Brian Kelly would get these guys into the playoffs and they in the championship game, they just get throttled by Alabama. And a lot of these people would say, "Oh, well, yeah, they're just awful. They're just awful." Well, not necessarily. The year that Alabama just rolled over them in the Orange Bowl, Alabama was just that much better. They could have put Notre Dame or Texas or anybody else in that game, and Alabama's going to steamroll them. But last night in New Orleans, I saw a Notre Dame team that completely controlled the line of scrimmage against a Georgia team. And again, not saying that Georgia didn't have some big plays defensively, but by and large, that Notre Dame team controlled the line of scrimmage on both sides of the ball. Now, both these teams came in with some key injuries, but at the same time, the Irish, their guys stepped up and they played like starters. And they, like I said, they went toe to toe with Georgia and they control that line of scrimmage on both sides of the ball.
Yeah, we had Notre Dame here. It was tough, really. It's hard to go against a Kirby Smart Georgia team in a setting like this, but and especially since Notre Dame's best defensive lineman is out. So that was in Kirby Smart pointed that out. He had no excuses after the game. He's like, "Hey, look, they were missing their best defensive starter, and they were, Georgia obviously was missing Carson Beck, but we said last show, and I asked you, I said, do you think this is the best team since 1988 when they won the title? And you did, and that's my view of this team. It's not the same team. I pointed out all those three losses. They got crushed by Alabama, by Clemson. Those teams weren't at this level. And, they showed it in that Sugar Bowl. And, Coach, the entire game flipped when it was 6-3. Maybe there was just seconds left in the second quarter. And Notre Dame went on to score 17 unanswered in a 26-second span.
Yeah.
So it went from 6-3 to 20-3 once Notre Dame returned the opening kickoff of the second half. Right. And the next thing you know, Georgia's sitting there with a backup quarterback, and they could never recover.
No. And every time they tried to make a move to get back in the game, you thought the Bulldogs were getting a little momentum. Then all of a sudden, Notre Dame, that defense would step up and make a big play and put the Bulldogs back down. Again, this game, you never want to, especially after what they did versus Georgia Tech, and we've seen them come back time and time again late in games. You never wanted to count Georgia out. But again, the Irish, they stood up. Going to take on Penn State in the Orange Bowl. That's next Thursday. Now, this is something that is going to be something to look for early to see how this Notre Dame team responds. And when I say responds, I'm talking about from a health standpoint. Because of Penn State playing the first game and then Notre Dame's game being postponed until the next night, realistically, they're going to have to come back and play on 5 days rest. And that's going to be tough.
Well, the game is on the 9th, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there was some talk about flip-flopping the games, but there's too many logistical issues.
Right.
And that could play a factor. Also, I haven't heard a lot talked about, their starting running back. They have two great ones, but number 4 didn't come back in the game. And that's the kid that, he can go – he went 98. So he's big, strong, and he can go the distance. Mm-hmm. So even if he plays but it's not 100%, that could be a big impact as well.
Mm-hmm. And the other semifinal, we've got Ohio State basically having to play Texas in their own backyard there in Dallas in the Cotton Bowl, and but yet the Buckeyes are going to go in and I think we were talking. You said they're going to be favored, even though they're having to go play in Dallas, and let's get technical about it, and play in Arlington, in Jerry's world. But that Buckeye team, Nick Saban likes them. A lot of people like them. And based upon the numbers that are coming out, seems like Vegas likes them pretty well.
Yeah. Ohio State is a 6-point favorite. And we have to be careful here. I'm not saying Ohio State's not going to win and cover. I haven't decided if we'll take a position on the game yet. But what I'm going to point out is recency bias. So many times in the NFL, in college football, you see what all we think of is what happened last, right? We just saw Ohio State obliterate the number 1 Oregon Ducks, and now they're going to come to Texas. I don't think the home field advantage is going to be that great because Ohio State, they travel well, they bring an army. Mm-hmm. And in fact, you thought Oregon might have had an advantage out in Pasadena on the West Coast, and they did not. Mm-hmm. So that's not going to be that big of a factor. I don't want to really commit to a play yet. I'm going to see what the line does, but we have to be careful. We just saw Ohio State run through Oregon like butter. So a lot of times you'll see that, and then this game is probably going to be a little more competitive. If it gets to 6.5, obviously 7, I'm going to take the dog here.
Yeah. All right. Well, Mike, we appreciate your time as always, and we'll be back to review these. Take maybe a little bit deeper preview into these games later this week, but obviously we'll have the recap as we go into next week, and then we still got a championship game to play
on January 20th.
Wow. All right. We'll be back on GameDaySportsRadio.com in just a moment.